Let's look at what is AWS Lambda. AWS Lambda is basically a serverless computing service. It's provided by Amazon Web Services. It allows you to run code. Basically, we need not have to manage the traditional servers, meaning how to deploy it, how to scale it, and everything. We need not manage it. It's a serverless computing service. With AWS Lambda, basically you can execute code with response to any event trigger. So, for example, there is a file which has been uploaded, or there's a photo which has been uploaded, or there's an API which has been triggered. So, what happens after that? Let's say there's a file uploaded, we need to make the processing changes and everything. So for that, we are going to write a lambda. It's going to do whatever it wants, whatever we actually write after the event has been triggered. So that's what the AWS Lambda is used for. It is serverless. Before we used to have everything off the server and everything, something like this. For example, before we used to have the Apache HTTP server or the IBM WebSphere and everything. So what we need to do is we had to install, we had to deploy, we had to manage the whole scaling of the whole server and everything. So right now, this is just the Lambda function. It's a serverless compute, and it does whatever we want to write with response to various events or triggers, such as it can be used with S3 bucket, DynamoDB table, or the HTTP request with the Amazon API gateway and the scheduled events and whatever we want, right? And AWS Lambda can be used to create APIs with the help of AWS API gateway to trigger Lambda functions in response to the HTTP request. So for example, the use case, let's imagine there's a data processing in the response to the file which has been uploaded. Suppose you have a system where users basically upload files, right? And you need to process this file. For example, we need to extract some data whenever there's upload and everything. So that's where we are going to use the AWS Lambda. Another example, what you can think of is real-time processing. For example, there's a photo sharing app, right? And you have a photo sharing app wherein users upload a image, for example, the Facebook or Instagram and everything. If you want to do the resizing or adding filters and everything, so that's where the Lambda can be written, and we can do whatever functions we want. We have to write the customized logic. So if you see the direct competitors or alternatives, for example, in the Google, we have the Google Cloud Functions. The Azure, we have the Azure Functions. And you also have something like Vercel. For example, in the front-end applications, there's a serverless which can be used. So that's where we will be using the Vercel. So it will be used for the serverless function. And also we have the Netlify, which is also similar to Vercel. And the usage, for example, as I said, it's a HTTP request. Let's say there's a HTTP request which happens with the help of the AWS API gateway. What happens after that? Should we take the API and do some processing and do some processing logic and everything, and then send some other response and everything? So that's where the HTTP, in the AWS Lambda has been written. Or there's an object storage change. There's an S3 bucket where we have uploaded a file. So what happens after that? Shall we generate a thumbnail image, or shall we resize it? Shall we modify it? So that's where we'll be using the AWS Lambda. There's a database change in the DynamoDB. After the table has been done, we can write a Lambda to trigger the data and to insert it, to update, to delete, or whatever we want, to execute Lambda function when data is inserted, updated, or delete. And we can also do a custom events. So how does the Lambda work is, we can write our own code, whatever we want our code in the supported languages, and then we can trigger our function. And this would come from the various AWS services. For example, the S3 bucket, the API gateway, DynamoDB, or whatever the RDS and whatever. We can write the custom event, and then we have to specify the resources and permission required by our function. So in terms of an code example, for example, let's say there's a Python AWS a Lambda example. So if you observe over here, so this is one of the Lambda function wherein we have something like a Lambda function. For example, this one says the Python AWS Lambda example, the hello world. It is written as the definition, that is the function in Python. and the function takes two parameters, event and context, and we can return the status as 200 and whatever we want, the hello AWS Lambda. In terms of Node.js, for example, we can say require AWS SDK new aws.s3. We are using the S3 bucket. In this, we are going to write our own custom logic. For example, async function, and we'll be writing the event. The event is taking the records and S3 bucket dot name and object dot key, like that. And then we can create new object has been created in this particular bucket, so and so. Object successful. And Java AWS Lambda example, the S3 object case is triggered. For example, in Java also we can write our own request handler. In that we can write our custom logic. For example, the handle request and then the get S3 bucket and all those stuff. Okay, so that's how we can write. And then we can write the AWS Lambda example. For example, the API gateway. We can write the Lambda handler, event, context, and response. Status code is so and so, and we can just give hello from Lambda like that. So these are a few of the examples. So we can write various triggers and various custom logic, and if this happens, kind of do this, and you can write your own custom logic and you can give a response to that. Thanks.